We're live and you're all set to share.
Thanks,
Yep.
Joe.
Oh, yeah. So from wood, work to work.
Yes. And calling Chris, let me know that he wasn't gonna be able to.
No, they changed the dinner time for that conference.
Is this when I was teaching in class or as a student? Oh, it's good.
Okay, so we'll begin our first budget work session of the fiscal planning year. So much preparation has gone in, and we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about the information we have at our disposal and some of the remaining unknowns. But by and large, we seem to have a lot of the information in to make some informed choices for the upcoming school year. So our process remains the same. We look at our priority areas, our focus. We talk about the process generally. We'll have several sessions between now and the May vote where we will look at potential revisions based on any questions or opportunities that we may have. And then we'll do a first draft overview. We'll look at how that first draft breaks down. So just on a basic level, forward working here, okay. So yeah, our process remains the same. It's really just identifying the revenue we anticipate receiving, the costs and expenses that we forecast having, and then identifying, certainly in the last couple of years, it's been to what extent of a deficit will we be running, given that our costs and expenses have exceeded our revenue. And that, as we'll talk about, is really a product of the tax cap, with being capped at 2% plus exclusions for a better part of a decade. All of the costs in the district have gone up exponentially more than 2%. So there creates some challenges here that we've been able to address that are getting closer to a friction point for the district. So this will be an important budget season for us. When we look at what our budget is, it's really an affirmation of a lot of our values as a district. And so we're actually in the 4th year of our strategic plan. So next year is the 5th year. It was a 5-year plan to begin with. And the goals that we have put in place centered around those 3 anchor points: academics, innovation, and well-being. In addition to that, the board has the annual goals that it creates. Those goals help to direct my efforts as superintendent. And then in my role as superintendent, I work with the administrative team and the department leaders for them to put forth goals instructionally and otherwise at the district. So everyone is aligned in the goal-oriented framework. We have a lot of diverse needs of our students, and so our budget reflects that, whether it's unique special education services, whether it's language services for English language learners, whether it's enrichment programs for students, dual enrollment, or programs for our youngest learners, our pre-K students. We have quite a bit of opportunities for kids. We have collaborative improvement processes in place that we leverage to try and identify where we can make improvements in our budget process. When it comes to our instructional teams, that really is the future planning process that's taken place over the last, happened in January, and we take from that time until now to identify additional priorities that may not have been present in the budget thinking early on. This has been a dominant piece of our approach, is just realizing efficiencies when we can. So over the past 4 years and looking into next year, we have had a net reduction of 14 positions full-time, 11 of which have been through absorptions. So combining sections, when someone has retired through attrition, we have not filled those positions. And then 3 of those positions have been the result of layoffs. And last but not least is fiscal responsibility. We know that the cost of living for the residents of Lake Placid, in North Elba and Wilmington, that cost of living continues to grow. And so balancing our need to produce a budget that supports kids, but also doesn't exacerbate cost of living issues for local residents is a huge issue. So those are some of the friction points for us as a district. When we look at some of the unique instructional components of this particular budget year, there are a few. So the first, probably at the elementary school, this will be the most dominant piece, is that we're in the process of selecting a math series for grades K through 5. So currently the K through 5 math department is reviewing their pilot experiences for those different programs. And we'll use our textbook selection process. Mrs. Franklin will oversee that. They'll make a recommendation to me. I'll review that information and then I'll provide that to the board. So that is something that we will be incorporating into this budget and all of the professional development that is associated with rolling out a new curriculum. We are looking at doubling our driver ed offerings next year. So the demand has been significant, and also the need for at least 2 blocks of schedule for kids, particularly students who go to AM or PM BOCES, since it's been something that we're looking to build in. Maintaining collaborative structures. Every 2 years, we ask each instructional team to put forth a department leader, and they serve a 2-year term. Our department leaders their term is coming up at the end of this year. So looking to revise that. Our department leadership team meets every other month, and then they also serve as building leaders in each building. So maintaining those roles will be important. Our instructional technology improvements. We've been sort of laboring with replacement cycle of our Chromebooks for students and for staff to have new devices and the display units like these to all be done on a cycle that doesn't put us in a position where we have to replace 70 or 80% of everything at once. It's been a moving target. And then midway through our cycle, we made the decision to only buy touchscreen Chromebooks for students, in part because of the computer-based testing and math, which really necessitates having a screen like that. So we're looking at, our plan presently is to replace 3 different grade levels of Chromebooks and stagger those out, and continue replacing our staff devices and our faculty display units. So this was the first one that we bought in the district, and it's still in good shape, but you know, we have older smart boards that need to be replaced and things like that. So we're looking to move on. And then it's no secret that at the elementary school, I referenced that through attrition, we've absorbed positions. So one of the things that we are looking to do is there's been some potential flex in the schedule against the RTI block that we have for our 4th and 5th grade students. And so we're looking at putting in an enrichment block for our students at the elementary school so that based on their interests, they can have additional access to specialists, which they didn't otherwise, except for the regular routine specialists. So those are just some of the novel components in this budget that we've incorporated based on our planning and our conversations with our teams. In terms of what we're forecasting for our actual budget for the year, a $24.6 million budget, which is a 6.5% increase roughly. And so when we factor in our property tax levy, which is 3.42%.
Yeah, it's actually 3.2. I made a mistake. I didn't change it.
Okay,
It's 3.2.
so the levy's going down already, guys. This is a good first session. All right.
It changed about 35,000.
Okay, so does that mean also then that 18 is going to be more like 18,625?
No,
No, that-
everything else is right.
Everything else is right,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
All right.
everything else is correct.
So of the 24.6, 18.6 million comes from our tax base. That's 76% of all of our revenue. And so you hear the 2% tax cap, and then when you factor in the exclusions for debt service that the district has, then that raises the property tax levy above the 2%, still under the threshold, but we're forecasting that at 3.2%. When we look at how that will impact every $1,000 of value for a resident landowner in the community, then that's an increase of 20 cents to $5.17 per $1,000 of assessed value. I'm not sure, do we know anything about equalization, Dana? If
No, we won't know that until I see the reports in July.
Okay, so North Alba has been very determined to assess property value at 100% of true value. And I believe last year Wilmington had a 95%. And so when that happens, then an equalization rate is put in place to equate different property.
Wilmington has kind of gone up and down the last couple of years. Last year was 95%, the year before was 100%, the year before that, it was like 80%. They went through a whole reassessment 2 years ago, basically. From 95% was sort of like a kind of a give of that.
So when you look at the projected, the first category, 6.49% increase and 3.2% increase, you can see the gap right there of our costs, about 3.3% more than we are able to generate revenue from just from the property tax share. For state aid, we're in a better position than we thought we would be 2 years ago when the Rockefeller study was conducted. At the time, Governor Hochul had indicated that districts whose enrollment had dropped precipitously, that enrollment would have an influence in the amount of state aid that schools would get. We are one of those schools whose enrollment has declined. It's referred to as a safe, harmless school. And that just means that we will not see less revenue from New York State from 1 year to the next, unless there's policy change, which they threatened to do 2 years ago. It was a source of much concern for us. So when we see a $20,000 increase, it's not the sort of increase that I think last year was 40,000 we got, David?
Yeah, last year we had a 2%, this year the 1%, the foundation aid.
But we'll score the win.
Not a negative.
Yeah, to get what we got last year plus 20,000 as opposed to 40,000 is kind of a win for us. And then really one of the big factors we'll be talking about in this budget cycle and certainly forecasting for next is where we're going to land with our fund balance. Some of our costs that have risen precipitously, health insurance in particular, that hit is so massive that we're going to have to rely on our fund balance an additional year to see us through. So these are just some of the aspects of our first draft budget that we're forecasting. Dana, why don't you talk a little about how our budget breaks down and whether or not this is reflective of a sound instructional program?
Just kind of backtrack a little bit, just so you can kind of do a tear down. When you look at the total budget, if you look at one of the attachments, it is, it looks like attachment C, the budget appropriations report. What I've included as a document is the budget line by line. So this is every line within the budget in terms of comparison between last year, this year, the dollar change, percentage change. So if you wanted to drill down and say, geez, what are we doing in athletics? What are we doing for special ed? What are we doing for teaching materials? You can see it in that document. It's a 9-page, 9-page document, line by line. We're not going to go through it line by line. If you have questions as we go through or in the next budget workshop, please ask. And then another attachment that you see is D, is the revenue reports. It's everything we just talked about is how our revenue is broken down to get to that $22.6 million. Okay. So here what you see is the percentage of the budget. So we're breaking down, the budget is broken into 3 categories, administrative, program, and capital. And you can see that's 80% of our budget is program. That's where you want it to be. Been pretty stationary in that respect. 80% that programming is, that's the instructional needs. That's, everything in terms of directly impacting students, including transportation. So when you see a budget breakdown, this is what you want. You want the program to be, in that 80% range. Next is our capital. That's all of our debt service. and facilities maintenance and all that, that's sitting at 12%. I think that's down by, like a percentage from last year, but that will stay relatively consistent because, and there what you'll see is it's our two bonds, our capital project bond, we have an energy performance bond that we're still paying on, as well as, buses. So we still have some bus leases and one purchase that is run through the budget as well. And then the last component is the administrative side. That's, the districts, that's administrators, that's sitting at 8%. It's been in that 6 to 8% for the last 6 years. And again, if you're looking at how a budget should be broken down, this is pretty darn close where you want it like this, in terms of how the costs are there. The next slide shows a breakdown of the major categories. And as you can see, salaries and benefits, make up, what's that, 83% or so, of our total budget is salaries and benefits. School districts, we rely on people. We're a people-driven, profession. So that's where, so when you see changes in salaries at 4%, 4.34%, and you see our benefits with our health insurance going up 22%. Yeah, that's the driving factor. We're 80+% of our budget is salaries and benefits. BOCES is making up about 8% of our budget. Actual expenses for BOCES is going up a little over 9% right now in terms of projection, but that equates to about 8% of our budget. Professional development is about 1%, technology is 1%, and our debt service is about 7% of the overall budget.
And that BOCES figure includes CVS and FEH,
Correct,
right?
yes, yeah. Because you'll look at it, if you look at, I think it's the next slide, you'll see a comparison. And you can see BOCES, is 9.5%. That's just the change from year over year. Previous slide just showing you what is the percentage of the budget versus a comparison between last year and this year. These are our major drivers are right there in the middle. Salaries and benefits, you can see benefits are going up almost 18%. Through attrition with retirements, our salaries are overall only going up a little over 1% because we are absorbing, I think, 3 positions at this point. And I think we're going to have 1 reduction at this point. So that's where you're seeing, we're able to minimize the salary increase. But if you were to look at what they are percentage wise, all of the staff are getting at least 3.5% of an increase, up to 4.75% is the range. But these are the major categories. These pretty much are pretty similar to what it is year after year.
And if you look at the numbers that have pretty significant year-over-year increases, with the exception of technology materials, which we budgeted an additional $70,000 to account for buying a 3rd set of Chromebooks for kids. That still is even in flux. We continue to talk about if there's opportunities to make some savings in this. But you look at the key ones, BOCES, benefits, those are the ones that we have little say in. So the elements that we have say in, athletics, salaries, debt service, PD, and technology, almost all of those you're seeing we are falling underneath that 2% because we have to make up ground somewhere when there's a 22% increase in benefits or BOCES costs are rising. If we're forecasting 3.2% to the public and BOCES costs are rising 9.52%, then we've got to make that ground up somewhere, and it can't be fund balance forever.
Next slide is just the breakdown of our revenue source. As Tim said, our property tax makes up about 76%, with an additional 8% is coming from the appropriated fund balance. So really 84% of our revenue is coming from local sources. Our appropriated fund balance is basically the buses that we've had over the years that we've been able to put away in savings. So 84% of our revenue are local sources. And then 14% comes from the states, and then 2% from other sources. Other sources would include the revenue we generate from our interest with the funds being in our NI class, our rental agreements that we have with Ironman, with Summit Lacrosse, tuitions that we generate from students from out of the district that come here as well. That all falls under other sources. You see here the knowns and the unknowns. Other than, I mean, this is one of those, years where we basically, at this point in our first session, most of our hard figures are known. In the past, depending on if it's a contract year or not, we would have more unknowns than knowns, but you'll see here is the CPIU was 2.4. But our cap was was capped at 2%. How you get to that is, the tax growth factor, which they generate every year in the district within the county, is the 1.0064. Estimated property tax is 3.2, not 3.4%. One of the attachments as well is attachment A is the property tax cap projection, and it looks like this. It will show you how we get to the 3.2%. It breaks it down in terms of all the stuff that you are seeing. In terms of we have, nearly $17,000 we get in pilots. We have 2 pilot properties, one for 4,000 that we've been getting for many years, and then the Mackenzie overlook that just opened up. And I think we're going to our 3rd cycle now. We get about $12,000 from a pilot agreement there. But yes, that attachment shows the breakdown as to how we get to the tax cap. Tim's already talked about what is the proposed amount that we would get from the states based off of the governor's executive proposal. The only really unknown at this point is what is that actually going to be until the state passes a budget, hopefully by April 1st. But that hasn't happened in 5 years. That's really the other unknown. ERS, that's our employee retirement system. That's an estimated increase of 17.6%. That's not like an increase. That's just what they're projecting. Last year was like 16 point something. TRS, the teachers retirement system, they're saying it's about 8.24% that we have to pay, into that system as well. You can see, broken down what the contractual obligations are per unit in terms of their salaries. We've already talked about health insurance increase of 22%. And then we're looking at an approximately 9.5% increase in BOCES. And that encompasses special ed, up in Plattsburgh, and that's the occupational side. Students going to building and trades or law and security or a New Vision program. That includes that. It's also their administrative component. I believe the administrative increase was about 7%. We're seeing a little larger increase on the occupational side because they added 2 new programs for our students, and our students are partaking in that. We have a New Vision. It's a marine tech, like small like engines for boats and stuff like that. That's run out of Saranac Lake, and they have a law and security program as well. I think it's in the 2nd year. So we have some students that are participating in those, and we see an increase because we have to pay for that service. So, showing you here in terms of our unallocated and restricted reserves, where are we sitting at? So currently we are sitting at a little over $3.7 million in unassigned fund balance. We have currently planned for $1.2 million in the current budget year to use for our appropriated fund balance. We are proposing using a little over $2 million for this coming year from our fund balance. So when you look at that, and as this breakdown happens, what we're really kind of trying to show you is if we use all of this, because we were sitting on a little $5 million in fund balance, if everything plays out as we have projected, in allocations. By the end of 2027, our fund balance will be down to $1.6 million or 6.8%, going from like 16% down to 6%. The state mandates or regulates a 4%. The Rockefeller study that came out a little over a year ago suggested that districts should be at 10%, but that's just a study that was not, passed in law. So, the law of New York right now is at 4%. So we would be sitting still above the 4%, but not by much. But if you see the last 3 years, we've increased what we've allocated from our fund balance to balance the budgets. This coming year is proposed at 2. The current year is 1.2. The year before that, it was $883,000. So you can see that we're steadily increasing in terms of our reliance on fund balance, but sure enough, that will go away. That's not a pot that necessarily you can replenish. If you are always spending from it, you're not able to replenish from it. So you can see the 4 and 10%. We do have currently about $2.7 million in restricted reserves. I don't know if the next slide shows you that. Yes. So the next slide kind of breaks down where we currently have funds and the amounts and the reserves we have. Unemployment, 434,000, tax surgery, 244. We took a $200,000 hit on that one. As you know, you voted on it, all that.
Yeah. Wonderful. Great.
EBLAR employee benefits is $800,000. That's basically, we can use that to offset. So when a staff member retires, they get a buyout depending on their years of service, sick days, vacation days, and all that. We can utilize that reserve to cover those costs. Several years ago, our budgets were such that we didn't even have to tap into that because we were able to absorb those costs within the budget. The last couple of years, that hasn't been the case. We have a capital reserve, which is dedicated for transportation, buses, vehicles, things like that. We're right now allocating $537,000 of that $1 million to purchase 3 buses coming up. So just like that, that will, be diminished. Retirement, we can have that set aside, $100,000 for TRS. We can use that if we ever want to offset any of our TRS expenses for retirement. You saw that was sitting at like 8%. And then we do have a current repair reserve of a little over $1 million. So and then you see that in the repair reserve is sitting there. You say, oh, geez, 1.118. $118,000, it was all from interest that is generated while the money is sat in our middle class system. So fund is there. The downside of it is as we utilize money from our reserves as well as our fund balance, that will also then lower what we had sitting in our investments. And that will also lower that one revenue source. If you look at, I budgeted about $400,000 from interest, which we typically, get. We have gotten over the last couple of years. Rates have gone down several times over this past year. So we're going to start seeing where that becomes more funds we use in our reserves, the less we'll have available to generate extra interest, and that line will go down. So there'll be that balancing act going forward between utilizing our fund balance and adjusting our interest revenue and anticipation because of everything that's factored in.
So this particular year, a 22% health insurance increase for us is $1.14 million. So that's substantial year-over-year increase. And specifically, when we look at the revenue we generate from our property tax base, after we factor in all of the additional revenue year over year, we still have $580,000 that we need to utilize from fund balance in order just to cover the one health insurance increase. And that's only one cost that has risen dramatically.
Tim, I always thought it was such a wonderful thing that we participated in this particular consortium for our health insurance. But it seems from just earlier reports that because of a few individuals, that really had to tap into the system, that's in part due to this huge increase. What other options are there other than this one consortium that we're in that might not have a 22% increase because a few people had to use their health insurance?
The smaller, if we were to leave, we would dilute, we'd be in a smaller, we wouldn't be in a group per se, a smaller group, and so if you had a high cost claimant in that group, it would hit us even harder.
Okay.
And so, Dana is our rep on the board, and I'm
So
sure it's
let's
all
look
planned.
at it. We look at it, so we have, CVS has a health consortium as
Right.
well. And then, over in the Potsdam area, that St. Lawrence, they have a health consortium. And both of them have gone through something similar to this at varying degrees. I think CVS was probably 5 years ago where they asked districts to, come up with another $1 million or so because, they didn't have the reserves that our consortium had and they had to, tap into that, same as St. Lawrence. So, you look at it and say, geez, how do you can't project
Yeah.
whether someone, is gonna have $1 million claim because they have kidney issues or cancer or whatever like that. You just can't project that. We were projecting 6% because that was what it was year after year. And then that 6% became 10%. Then the second year became 10%. So when do you say 10% is now the new trend? After 2 years, or do you still, factor it in? So we had to make a correction this year, the consortium, to ensure because we lost, $10+ million over the course of a year and a half. Luckily, we had the reserves, but now we have to correct it so that we can maintain a healthy consortium. And that's why, it's not ideal, because 3 years ago, right out of COVID, we got back almost $1 million because we went 2 years without seeing what we budgeted, insurance was down during the COVID and all that, and some would say that we're reaping the effects of
Delayed.
2 years because what they say, like delayed costs. People didn't go and then things got missed because they didn't go and then people were catching up and now they're going. And the problem they might have caught 2 years ago during, as a routine check, they didn't do. And now that problem becomes, even bigger, because they didn't see the signs. So, yes.
But is that worth 22%? I mean, come on. That's-
Well, when you look at it, yes, we were
I
saying.
get it, but
yeah,
that's crazy.
$10-15 million loss. I mean,
That's-
right, you can't project. Oh, I agree,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and I just can't wrap my head around that. I mean,
I agree.
obviously, we all need health insurance, but I can't wrap my head around.
And you can
Now
see
it's about
though,
22%,
you know,
the
we-
district has to absorb it.
but if we, maintain it, because this current year, we budgeted 12%. The year before was 5.5%, because that's where we were trending. You can see how quickly it changed. We were doing 2 years ago, we had a 5.5%, and that was slightly less than what our historical was, about 6.5%. And then boom, lo and behold, we had a really bad year, so that became 12%. And had another bad year, so that 12% becomes 22%. So to maintain the health of the consortium, so that if it's even crazier than this, the 22% is just ready to ship at this point. Where next year we will be bringing in enough revenues through premiums to cover expenses. So that, because consortium has to by law, maintain a 22% surplus. We have to be able to cover everything in case the consortium shut down. That is by New York State's regulations. So in order to keep that 22%, which we are required to keep, this is why we have to make the correction. We had $39.6 million in the fund balance, and within 2 years, we were down to 20-something. Yes.
Does the age demographic in the staff stay steady?
Right, if you do a comparison to other, groups like us, our age, average age is slightly higher than other comparisons. So we sit at, in terms of subscribers, which is about 3,100 subscribers, or about 6,000 people are on our care. We go from our subscribers of like age of 57. So the average age of our employees in this consortium, 10 districts, about 57. When you factor in everything, everyone, that goes down into the 40s.
But is it steady?
Yes, yep, it's been that way. That's been the trend for 10+ years.
And Dana, we've seen, like a decade ago, there were more employees covered in the
Correct.
consortium. Those folks many have retired. So when they fall into Medicare and this becomes secondary for them, we should see some reduced costs associated with that, I would hope.
Yeah, what's happened too is where we're trending, and we're seeing it in our, I mean, Tim just mentioned it, we reduced our staff by 14 in the last couple of years. And we're seeing that other districts are seeing the same thing, so our membership is driving down. So what we generate from premiums is less than what we had in the past because fewer people are working. So that's where the premium price goes up because we gotta cover, the costs over fewer people. Yeah, so throw in at higher cost, fewer people, and that increases the premium because we gotta cover, yes.
Has there ever been any discussion of combining all of the consortiums into one consortium, or are they actually?
The other consortiums have reached out to us, but we've said no because quite honestly, ours is better. It's better, it's healthier, we say 22%, and that is a dropping number. However, the two that I mentioned went through similars and they didn't have the reserves, and that's why they had to reach out and say to the districts mid-year, we need $1 million just to cover. And then they went and did program changes and added, lesser programs, if you will, to help meet the price. So yes, they have reached out at some point throughout the years.
I just didn't know whether with a larger base.
Right,
you
yes.
could Cover contingencies.
Yeah, yes. I don't think it's been explored because,
But if we're better than other people, it's not to our advantage.
right, yes.
Okay.
Plan design is where we're headed. We need to look at the different
Yes.
plans. Classic Blue was the gold standard for years, and then now that it's become the PPOJ plan, and now the newest is the high deductible plan, and so putting options into different negotiated agreements is the only way that this is going to be sustainable in the long term. And Dana clamors for plan design conversations every time he goes to the consortium. So
You get tired of that, they keep asking me when I'm gonna retire and.
Because you ask questions, you just don't go, okay, yeah, you ask questions.
we'll make sure you can be our rep in retirement.
Yeah.
So all of that really leads to this slide, you say, between a rock and a hard place. I mean, everything that we just talked about, is what this slide highlights in terms of the things that we are experiencing over this coming year and what we kind of forecast in the near future.
And I remember last year announcing to staff on, maybe it was opening day, that we had generated over $1 million in revenue for our interest in NICLAS. And now you're talking about $400,000 that we're booking. So, we were making good money a couple of years ago, and our returns are just not what they used to be. So
No, the rates have gone down. I mean, we were sitting 2 years ago, well, a year and a half ago, we were sitting about 5%. We're down at just under 4% at this point.
So the things that we've done, I mean, I just want to credit Dana for seeing the writing on the wall. Within the first month that I was here, we sat down and we looked at projections that he had laid out and said, we're being chased right now by costs that we cannot possibly address in the long term due to the way we generate revenue with the tax cap. So we've tried to take bites of the debt apple over time. As I mentioned, the reductions in positions, we've really honed in on teacher schedules and had folks work to the contract to make sure that everyone is has the same number of preps that we're allowed to give, so we can make those reductions when people retire. We've seen our class sizes increase as a result of this. And at times we've walked away from costly services that we've been able to put up in-house. Probably the most notorious of this would be the PASS program at BOCES, which we were able to utilize staff that had capacity in their schedule. I think produce an outstanding product. That's now our streaming program, and forego having to spend over $1 million essentially. So that was tremendous savings for the district. We've had programs that we really like that are extracurriculars. that we've had to turn into grant dependent programs just because they're not going towards the core instructional product that we produce. Probably the hardest hit one for me was the Woods program, which something I am and was super passionate about, and still soliciting grant funds for that. But our general fund with these other costs can't absorb the kinds of things that we've had for enrichment in the past. We continue to draw on our fund balances, but like Dana said, our hope is that what we allocated to use in this current year, the 1.2 million, that we actually don't spend all of that. So we can have a little extra in our fund balance for the following year. That Rockefeller study that said 10% is kind of where districts should land in fund balance. Our projections are we'd be around 6.5% at the end of next year. So we want to not spend everything we allocate if possible and land closer to 10% fund balance next year. We don't want to be below that figure. Even when we've been audited by folks from the comptroller's office, they've acknowledged that municipalities are not bound by that same 4% rule.
No.
And that we, if we ever had something that was a financial emergency, it would more than likely to cost more than 4% of our total budget to cover that. So 10% is kind of where we're trying to land for the end of next year. I even have word going out to staff this month that we're stopping any unnecessary purchases from now until the rest of the school year, just trying to preserve what we can in that the amount we allocated in the fund balance so we can roll it over to next year and keep us within that recommended 10%. And then we've relied on favorable interest rates. I mean, we're not gonna squawk at 400K, that's great, but we were doing really well in the last couple
I'm
of
just
years.
gonna give you a perspective. 4 years ago, that budget line was $35,000. So, and that was coming right out of COVID, and then rates started to go up. So we went from budgeting $35,000 to $400,000.
So that's the main rundown of the budget. And then, of course, just when we look at our process itself, the budget vote, working backwards, that's May 19th this year. And so our hearing, every other year, we've been alternating between Lake Placid and Wilmington for our hearings, and Wilmington is up this year. So we're planning on going to Wilmington for our budget hearing. By the 21st or earlier, the board will need to adopt a budget. And by April 20th, that is when candidate petitions are due for school board seats. Any questions about our first look at the budget for the year?
Do you have anything that breaks down building spending?
I don't have it broken down by building, no. I could get it that way. If you would like.
Is it too much to ask?
No, because one of the reports that we have to generate for the state and this, it always do in December, is the ESSA reports.
Yep.
Which looks at building expenses. So yeah, and then you can see everything's coded by building as well. So yes, I could easily run something on, elementary code versus middle high school code.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd be great.
it would be
Thank
pretty
you.
straightforward, yes.
Thank you.
Will, pretty heady stuff, huh? The sausage gets made here, I don't know.
I think again, very frustrating that Elderwood comes out of nowhere and they finally. I'll say it, I don't care. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, now we're taking money from the budget, from the kids, from the teachers, because of something that happened 5, 6 years ago. It wasn't this board's fault. And at the end of the day, like, that's very shameful on the side of Elderwood.
I think we did have a reserve, we had a
Thankfully, we did, but what if
reserve.
we didn't?
Yes, exactly, well. that's
And
what
now whatever
happened.
reserve we
Yeah.
have is slashed in half, and we're trying to make it up. And the last thing anybody on this board wants to do is raise taxes, but what do we do? That's the hard part, that's a hard discussion that we're all gonna have to have something.
Maybe as early as next year,
Yeah.
we have to really make an appeal to the resident tax base. And we can show that we've dwindled our reserves, we've cut where we can, maintained our core priorities.
Right.
Then at least I think we can make a cogent,
And again, if you look
Target
at
for those funds.
historically, our tax levy, since I've been in this position, has gone down. When I came into this position, we were pushing $7 a thousand. Now we're sitting at $4.97 a thousand. And the projection for next year is actually based off of current year's numbers. We don't get the actual number until July. And again, every year since I've been in this position, what is projected actually comes in lower than what the actual is. Because it's gone down nearly $2 in a matter of 5 years.
That's tied to property value.
Yeah, that's, part of it is because people's property value keeps going up every year. So that's the other side of it is assessments are going up every year. So there's a larger pool pull from because of that.
You guys do board's work, so I appreciate it as a board member, I'm sure we all do.
We're grateful to have Dan. It's
You know,
super sharp in this way.
again, there's just little things that have happened to us along my tenure on the board, and it's like, didn't have to deal with that, we'd be significantly better.
All right, well, if there's no more questions, then we'll close the budget workshop and we'll, Joe, you wanna switch up? Are we gonna go live right from the exec? How are we gonna do that?
Yeah, we're gonna wait to go